What's going on, guys? We're back at it again with another episode of Convos with Dr. Andy on True Capacity Talks. And today we're going to be breaking down something that I know that the TC coaches get a lot. I know Andy got when he was coaching CrossFit a good bit. And I know he also still gets, right, being a chiropractor full time and going hands-on every day. And that is injury, but not how injury happened, but getting back to exercise after injury. Okay. And we kind of want to break it down into two areas, right? The psychological side, right? We'll call it that. There's a more fun term, but psychological, and then, physiological, and kind of they're intertwined, right? We're going to kind of break them down on both sides. When you're coming back from injury, right? You're not going to be ready to go psychologically or physiologically day one, right? When you start to get back to movement after an acute or a chronic injury, especially something that happened when doing an exercise, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get back. So Andy, let's start. I'd love if you could unpack the areas in which it's difficult from a physiological standpoint to get back to exercise. And let's maybe use the example of a failed front squat, right? A failed front squat led to injury, maybe a back injury, right? Mm-hmm. And you're cleared by doc, healthy, ready to go, technically speaking, to get back to exercise. But you hurt yourself, you bottomed out in a squat, you fell forward, you kind of tweaked your wrist, you maybe hit your quads, you fell on the ground, low back hurts, you've recovered from that. Why is it hard to get back to front squatting again?
Yeah, physiologically speaking, because we'll talk about the psychosomatic, the psychological aspect of that. I'll let you kind of cue up on it, but anytime that there's a trauma or a damage to the body, physically, right? Physically speaking. So you have an adaptation. So, and I'll kind of keep it service level with this. So I typically call that like tissue tolerance or tissue intolerance. So for the example, let's say front squat, right? Because I specifically remember, I think it was probably 10 years ago. I'm 34, 24. So when I was 24, I was coming up out of a front squat, and I let the bar kind of settle back on my shoulders, and I felt my entire low back just light up like the 4th of July. It felt like just fireworks going up my spine, around my rib cages, and down my extremities. I didn't know what was happening at the time. But anyway, I crumbled to the floor, couldn't move around, couldn't get up, for about 30 minutes. And lo and behold, that was the reason why I couldn't move, was because my brain basically put out like a PSA, a public service announcement to shut my muscles down, almost like on guard. So there's probably been a lot of people out there that have done what James is talking about, where they've moved, right? Whether it be a front squat, right? Or just bending over to pick something up, and their back is spasmed, their low back specifically, right? And they're like, oh gosh, I can't move. I can't stand up. I can hardly move my legs. I can barely twist. Getting in and out of bed is difficult, if not impossible. So the brain had went to a protective mechanism to literally put you in jail. And what I mean by that is it basically just, it's constantly setting off signal to the muscles to be tight, what's called hypertonicity. Okay. So it puts you almost in like this metaphorical jail cell where you literally can't move, because the brain says, I don't trust you to move because you're going to hurt me. So walking back, like James, you were saying, doc said, oh, hey, you're good. You're capable of getting back to front squatting. Let's just say for this example, tissue's probably going to be tight. For one, if you've been stuck in a position where let's say you're stuck in the seated position for a prolonged period of time, certain muscles in the front part of your body, such as your quads, right, such as your hip flexors, which are primarily in the front part of your body, they're going to be stiffer because they have not been stretched or ran through a range of motion. So when you go to move initially, right, you can't just go back or expect to go back to exactly what you were pre-injury. You can get there, but you kind of have to grease it and milk that back. And we'll kind of explain that in a second. And two, your nervous system is a little bit more heightened, right, than it was prior. So you can, this is not a demeaning, statement to place on like, well, this is only left for those that have suffered from any kind of severe trauma, such as, wartime, right? Or any maybe familial abuse or anything like that. But PTSD, your body has PTSD for far less, seemingly less traumatic stuff, such as an injury in a front squat. So if your brain thinks that you're going to hurt it, it's going to keep muscles tight to prevent you from going into ranges of motions that it doesn't feel comfortable with. So we have to kind of coax the body back into being comfortable with tolerating that motion again. That's why I call it tissue tolerance. So I don't know if that answers your question, James, initially, but when you do, in this example, get hurt in your low back, it's good for not only just because if you love squatting, getting back to squatting, but just for sheer survival sake, for thriving sake, it's good to get back to moving in general, because that's just because you got hurt doesn't mean that, oh crap, I can't do that movement ever again.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now, as far as someone front squat specifically, like let's unpack this example for just a second. Someone's getting back, like they're cleared, right, quote unquote cleared to start front squatting again, and they're good to go there. Now, outside of the movement of front squat, what would you, as a coach or as a practitioner, say that they need to do to get their body physically primed for actually moving through that range of motion without having a response of the body, like stopping or tightening or guarding to get back to actually squatting?
Yeah, the first thing that goes through my head would be, thinking about the joints that are involved in the squat. It's more than we initially think, right? We have feet, ankles, if you want to get nitty gritty, toes, but we'll kind of keep it surface level for this. But yeah, ankles, knees, hips, spine, right? And shoulders if you're going to be using weight. So I want to see where all those specific areas are, and if they're, lubed up for motion, essentially. So you can think of blood flow, as lubricant of the body. So I want to make sure that they have sufficient blood flow so that they feel comfortable moving. Because if you've ever woken up on a really cold morning and just initially try to get up and maybe do a squat, right, you're probably going to be feeling stiff. And whether you're 80 years old or whether you're 20 years old, you're probably going to feel stiff, right? And typically that's because blood flow is not surrounding that joint. So yeah, those muscles need blood flow in order to be warmed and moved. So for the front squat specifically, I'm thinking about, okay, let's work and see where your ankle flexion is. Let's see where your knee flexion is. Let's see where your hip flexion is. Let's see how well your spine moves. In a front squat, your spine does move. Your lumbar spine does round, okay, or flex. But again, in a previous episode, we talked about neutral spine. Neutral spine is when you're looking at, simplistically, if you're looking at an athlete and they're squatting, you should see their spine not move aesthetically as if you're looking at them. Their spine does move regardless of whether you see it or not from an external perspective, but inside their spine actually is moving. So you need to prime that. So if you constantly just practice holding a stiff spine all the time, guess what? When they go to front squat again, right, which may have been the mechanism why they got hurt in the first place, and I'm talking to me on this one, if you constantly just act like your spine should never move in the first place, when it does move, yeah, your body's going to signal to yourself, hey, dumbass, and it's going to spasm you, or it's going to give you spasms to not allow you to move because it hasn't primed that. So did you want certain exercises as well, like maybe just one or two per area?
Yeah. I mean, when we're talking about front squats, I was looking for just, from a structural standpoint, what kind of things could push us there. You can go into specific exercises for front squat, but what I was more looking for is a framework for people to apply to the part of the body that they've injured when they're coming back. Like, hey, if it's a low back thing, so I guess some exercises would work. I really just want a framework that people can apply to their life so that they can start to do things outside of just the same movement loading that will give them benefit and roll them back in safely, right? Even if there's not a practitioner sitting in front of them, like, do this and do this and do this,
Sure. Yeah, something practical that they can apply for themselves. Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, and if I can, I'll use my own example on this, right? Because I have had a low back injury from squatting. It was a back squat versus a front squat. But anyway, so I needed first and foremost a way to figure out how to exercise again. Not only just go back to, squatting and lifting, but like just move. So, and therein lies kind of the solution. Like you need to figure out yourself how to just move and move in as many different ranges and directions as possible. Initially that's probably going to look like unloaded. So if that's just rolling on the floor, that's just rolling on the floor. And I know that sounds goofy, but slow movements like that, right? The spine, which is usually the hot topic for a lot of people, right? Bend, rotate, twist, flex, extend, laterally bend your spine in different directions, whether it be loaded or you just do that without any weight on you. That's a great way to start introducing back movement. The next thing after that would be to like add a little bit of weight, right? Barbell would probably be the last thing that I would add, just because it does axial load your joints.
No matter what you're doing.
No
If
matter
you have a barbell, you got downward pressure here.
right. Yeah. Whether it's hanging in like a deadlift position, right? Or it's on your spine or overhead. Yeah. So, unilateral stuff, holding one dumbbell while you're doing some of those rotational stuff, right? Or like bending and all that. But just introducing all facets of movement into joints and take that, apply that to your hips, right? Your hips can move circumductally. I'm not even sure if that's a word, but circumduction. We'll pretend circumductally is a word. I may have just made that up.
We'll take it.
But the shoulder and hips, right? They move in circles, right? So move those joints, jumping jacks, super, super primitive, remedial, simple movement, right? But it's a great way to just get movement into your joints. Yeah. So, knee, ankle, foot, toes, shoulder, elbows, wrists, right? Low back, just move your joints. And there's a plethora of exercises that you can just pull up on YouTube or Google or even picking up a book that has a bunch of exercises. Just know that if you start anywhere, if you can't start with weights, just start with your own body weight. Because this is all it's all about building tissue tolerance. So like when you injure yourself, your body goes into this overly protective mode, right? Like a mother who witnessed her child getting hurt playing a sport, well, she's going to be very hesitant to like let her child go out and play that sport again. So she's going to like hold on tight or just be overprotective, helicopterish. Your brain's going to be the same way. You just have to slowly integrate movement back in, whatever, range of motion that was. For me, I couldn't bend over and pick something up off the ground. So I had to slowly introduce flexion back into my spine with some rotation to tell my brain like, hey, this is going to be okay. This movement is not dangerous. Tying my shoe is not dangerous.
Yeah.
So now if you do experience pain with some of that stuff, right? So understanding the difference between pain and damage, and everyone's going to have a different pain tolerance. I understand that. And this is something that you're going to have to, kind of get really honest and internally process this. What is actually pain and what is actually damage? I don't necessarily have that answer for somebody, right? But it's going to be one of those things where it's like, okay, am I anticipating this is going to hurt, which is giving me the sensation that's going to hurt, right, physically? Or am I actually doing something that I literally cannot do right now? So if I go and air squat, I know I'm going to be okay. If I go and load the bar up with 315 on my back and try to go squat it, I'm going to have a preconceived notion that that's going to hurt because that's what hurt me in the first place. Even though I haven't done that in over 3 years. So for me, I'm not just going to go back to 315 and expect everything to be okay. Should I? I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't even squat 315 now, but I'm going to, if that's my goal, right, I'm going to systematically work back to ensure that, I'm going to first start with an air squat, right? And I'm going to try to get my spine more mobile. And then I'm going to eventually increase weight, right? Slowly over time to get back to 315. But if you just go back from like 0 to 100, or in this case, body weight to 315, yeah, there's probably going to be some psychosomatic effect, right? Thought of, man, this is what hurt me last time. Maybe this will hurt me again. And you're already kind of setting yourself up to experience pain. And if not, leave yourself at more risk for damage. So I'll let you kind of, talk about the psychology of coming back from an injury. I hope that kind of like covered some of the physical stuff, but just slowly over time, right? Just you want to build the tolerance of the tissue best you can.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. So I want to be concise because I think it can kind of be broken down pretty easily. Similar to when Andy's talking about PTSD, right? as it pertains to re-injuring or aggravating a pre-existing injury, or even just getting to that position. Sometimes physiological responses will present when your mind goes to that place. So
Yeah.
there's a phenomenon, right? And hypochondriacs feel this all the time, right? Where they're thinking that something is happening, and so they're having the presenting symptoms or the semblance of the presenting symptoms in their body before or during things that are happening. So it's very intentional to understand that that can be happening without you realizing that it's happening, and that there's ways for you to go ahead and control some of that physiological response, especially when it's outside of you actually doing the things that are even hurting. You could be standing still and about to be picking up a bar and feel that. I'm like, whoa, your heart rate jacks up, your shoulders get a little bit raised, you start perspirating a little bit more, your body temperature comes up, right? Those are physiological responses, similar to like if you go through an intersection that you got in an accident, you got T-boned in, before you get into the intersection, your brain is smart enough to say, oh shit, this is where we got hurt. This is where this happened. And it might push on you the feelings, the thoughts, the physiological response that you had from that, and it might come back. So being aware that that may happen, and just like Andy was saying, differentiating between, hey, is this psychological, or is it actually something that I should not be doing because it's unsafe, right? We can't tell you how to get to the place where you can tell the difference. But what I like to do, and Andy, if you have anything here, I would love to hear it. But for me, right, there's a little checklist, right? Before you're doing anything, when you feel like you're going, you're like, wait, but this is 5 pounds. Like, why am I feeling this way? Check where your shoulders are. Are your shoulders in your ears? Because if they are, there's probably a problem, right? How's your breathing, right? On a previous episode, we talked about box breathing and nasal breathing, right? Physiologically, bring that stress response down a little bit, right? Do you feel like every time you're hyper aware, your pupils are dilating? Like, are things like that happening? Because that's a response that should indicate to you that something is going on in the brain, right? Even if you're not doing anything. And so differentiating between that and true danger is going to be overwhelmingly beneficial for you to get back to movement and you get back to life. Because if every time you feel like, you go to reach down and pick up something, and you feel like, and your body sends, you're psychologically like, oh shit, I'm going to get injured. I'm going to get injured. I'm going to get injured. And then everything like that comes on. How do you live a life like that? Nearly impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Nearly impossible. And so I would run box breathing, right? I would run, journaling if it happens pretty consistently outside of the gym. I would look at making sure that you're aware of when it happens and what exercises, what movements, what time of day it happens, and usually what, encaps it on both sides. But for me, psychological stuff, like that's something you have to actively work on, just like tissue tolerance. You cannot passively work on that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're just so. I mean, obviously the brain is tissue, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and we've mentioned this, or you've mentioned this on a previous episode, where you just you build a tolerance, you callous your mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that does not. I want to be clear on this. That does not mean ignoring feedback or signals from your body,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, let me push through the pain. I hear that a lot. It's like, nah, that's gonna catch you at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just you end up becoming a more what's the I can't think of the right word, but I was working out with a buddy of mine the other day, and we were doing some handstand walks and kind of going up and over obstacles, and I haven't done that in a long time. And James, you probably have known this, but like getting upside down overhead hurt my back, right? Well, when I say hurt, I felt my back, right? It was uncomfortable for me for a long time. But when my buddy was watching me do this, and then when he would go, he explained later, he's like, man, we're totally opposite. Like, you're completely, I can tell how systematic you are when you move. Like, everything is with a purpose and you think out everything. And then when he goes, he's just a bull in a china shop. He's like, cool, I got to get from A to Z, and I don't care what letters we skip, right? Like, we're going to get there. So now I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying that there's a difference. Now, I can tell you that my buddy hasn't really experienced any major setbacks. So I think for him, he's in a space where he's never had to he's never had to be forced to be sidelined and
Mm-hmm.
navigate around something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I hope, if you're listening to this, like I hope that's never you. I hope that you never have an injury that causes you to be sidelined to have to kind of go through this. But what James and I are kind of trying to bring to your attention is that what I'd wish I had done when I was younger was I wish that I had known to bring my joints, bring my body physically into angles and positions and ranges actively that I had not really focused on. Because when I did go and move my body under load and not intentionally move it into a space that I hadn't trained before, that's when it got hurt. So you will be better prepared. Your brain will be better prepared, and your body, your tissues will be better prepared if you train in some of these, extreme or fringe spaces movements. So like if all you do is do a perfect, when I say this, when you do a perfect squat, or you only allow yourself for your knee to go over your toes so much, or you only allow so much ankle flexibility, or you never bend to the side or rotate or flex your spine and train that, well, in the off chance that you ever do get into that aberrant position with weight, your risk of injury goes through the roof. And so when getting back to being able to move physically, you have to kind of go back through those steps. Well, you have to train the area where you got hurt in order to go back to, work out and lift in the quote unquote safe space. Because if all you do is work in the safe space and you never train outside of that safely, right? Then the moment that you slip out of that safe zone, that perfect form, yeah, your risk of injury potentially goes, skyrockets. So psychologically, James, I don't know if, like, it almost kind of seems like it acts the same way. Like if you don't overcome that fear of, well, I can never do that again. Yeah, like at some point you're whether or not you deliberately do it or not, you may be more susceptible to injury if you don't overcome that initial fear. Like if I'm going to the gym and I don't want to, and I'm nervous to squat, I have to process why. Like it's 3 years now since my injury. Like if I'm nervous to squat, like why is that? Is it because I just keep having this PTSD that keeps relapsing, or
Mm-hmm.
is there actual tissue degradation that I need to address?
Yeah. And I think that can be applied similarly to like when somebody gets knocked out in the cage, right? If you or a pilot is flying a plane, if you try to focus on the building that you're trying to avoid, guess what's going to happen? You're going to hit it. If you try
Yeah.
to avoid getting knocked out in a fight instead of trying to knock the other person out in a cage, right? And unified rules, right? If you try to avoid not getting knocked out, guess what's probably going to happen? You're going to open yourself up to getting knocked out more because that's what you're focusing on, right? So
Yeah,
differentiating between the two things is extremely important, because if you don't do it, you will be just a victim of circumstance. And we're not about that here at this program. We're not about that in anything that we do in life. You should be forging your path and doing the best that you can do with the information that you have at your hands. And the fact of the matter is, if you don't do anything to get yourself back, you will be just a matter of circumstance. And circumstance does not bode well for people over time.
Yeah.
If you're constantly being reactive, you will not be where you want to be 20 years down the road.
The
Reactivity will not do it.
you said that well. The analogy that I just came to my mind when you stated all that was like, you can either play to win or you can play not to lose.
There it is.
And both teams, right, should prepare. Like you just
Mm-hmm.
said, they should do all their due diligence prior. But going into game day, going into training, or whatever it is in life that you want to do, you are going to be far less successful if you play not to lose versus playing to win.
Yeah.
In my mind.
If you brace for impact when you're Colorado going to play Oregon rather than trying to go out there and win, I mean, it's two different ball games, right? Now, could you get lucky? Could something happen? Sure. But same here. If you just brace for impact, man, I'm going to CrossFit today and I hope I don't get injured. I'm going to do my best to not get injured, as opposed to I'm going to CrossFit today to have a solid workout, to move, to get my heart rate up, and to load. Those are two different outcomes that you're looking for. And
Yeah.
one outcome you're trying to avoid, one outcome you're trying to go towards. Completely different. And those will control a lot of times the destiny of what you have in front of you. And
Yeah.
so I don't want to beat a dead horse. I think that that's a heck of a breakdown on both sides. Injuries you can come back from. You absolutely can. but you have to do more work than just load back through the same range of motion that you got injured in. And I think that people take it for granted, right? They go see a PT, they go see a chiro, they get like an acute relief of something that then they're not doing the work for the underlying problem. And that's a problem. It's a big problem. 100%. And so I think that we're good on that. Thank y'all for listening. And we'll see you next week, man. Peace.